Syrian President Bashar al-Assad spoke to French newspaper Le Figaro, and when asked how his country would respond to a military strike, he said, quote, "The Middle East is a powder keg and the fire is approaching today. Everyone will lose control of the situation when the powder keg explodes. Chaos and extremism will spread. The risk of a regional war exists." A regional war. Is this a threat by the Assad regime or a message on behalf of its ally Iran? Let's bring in former CIA Director Michael Hayden. He's now a principal with the Chertoff Group, a risk management and security firm. General, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. When you hear language like that from Assad, what is the worst-case scenario here in terms of if the U.S. does do some limited strikes? What exactly is he talking about?
Well, we want it to be a one and done. All right, the president's made that very clear. Very limited strikes, very limited objectives, deterring, degrading the potential use of chemical weapons. He's doing it, our president, to show resolve. Well, guess what? Assad and his Iranian and Hezbollah allies are going to want to show resolve too. They're not going to want to give the United States a free ride for this kind of action. So I would expect one of those actors, particularly the Iranians, engineering some sort of response. And once you start this, Jake, it's hard to control it. Now look, I think we ought to actually take action. I think I support what Senator McCain said in the White House driveway. But you can't believe that it's one and done. Once you start using heat, blast, and fragmentation to actually text messages to another leader, things can get out of control.
And what do you anticipate that Iran would do in response? You think Iran would send a nuclear missile?
No,
they don't have the capability yet. Do you think that they would fire some sort of missile? What exactly do you see?
Well, look, Assad was being a bit overly dramatic because that serves his purposes right now. He wants to deter American action. The last thing that the Iranians, Hezbollah, or the Syrians want is to expand this into a regional war. They've got their hands full right now. They're on the edge. But I can't imagine that particularly the Iranians would use their weapon with strategic reach. Our strategic reach weapon is air power and those Tomahawk missiles with the fleet in the Eastern Mediterranean. Their strategic reach weapon is Hezbollah. And they could then use Hezbollah to attack Americans, American interests in the region, and perhaps as far as North America.
A White House official told Playbook that they're pushing this message to members of Congress. Quote, "Anyone who is concerned about Iran and its efforts in the region should support this action." And you also heard Lindsey Graham make that same argument. This is not just about Syria. Right. It's about Iran. If Syria gets away with using chemical weapons, who knows what Iran will do? Obviously, Syria and Iran allied. Is that a good argument as a former CIA and NSA official? Is that a good argument to make to people on Capitol Hill?
I think that's a very good argument to make. Unfortunately, the argument has been a bit eroded. I mean, we're talking about red lines. As I said before, the key here is to display American resolve. When the American president says something, we mean it, and we will back it up. Now, I do think we ought to act. But, Jake, just look at the scenario. It's been a long time, probably will be the better part of a month, even under the best-case scenario, before we respond. The response will be very limited. We've made that very clear. And the time it's taken us to respond has shown very severe political fracturing in the West when it comes time to acting. So if our purpose here is to show resolve, we can do it physically. I just don't know that the psychic effect now is going to be all we wanted it to be.
I want to, as a former director of the NSA and CIA, I want to get your insight into something that was in the unclassified intelligence briefing that Secretary Kerry and the administration put out. Quote, "We have intelligence that leads us to assess that Syrian chemical weapons personnel, including personnel assessed to be associated with the SSRC, were preparing chemical munitions prior to the attack. In the 3 days prior to the attack, we collected streams of human signals and geospatial intelligence that reveal regime activities that we assess were associated with preparations for a chemical weapons attack. Our intelligence sources in the Damascus area did not detect any indications in the days prior to the attack that opposition affiliates were planning to use chemical weapons." I think a lot of people might read that and think, so we knew that there was a chemical weapons attack coming and we didn't do anything? Is that wrong for people to think?
Yeah, a little bit, but let me try to explain the circumstances here. We always operate under a responsibility to warn. We're very cognizant of that. When we see imminent attack, an attack is likely, we do have both moral and legal responsibilities. It could be, Jake, and I don't know, I'm not in government, I'm not seeing the reporting. It could be that only looking backward, having the information we now have, does it illuminate and give certainty to the information we had in prospect. Maybe it has this deep meaning only in retrospect.
And from a military perspective, does the delay that we're talking about here, there's obviously going to be no military strike at least until next week, maybe even beyond that. Is there a military risk that would make the effectiveness less so? The Syrians can put their assets in places that they weren't before. They can put human shields in places given a lead time.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think it's the psychic effect that's most important, not the physical effect. We're not going to make him unable to conduct chemical attacks. We want to make him unwilling to conduct chemical attacks. So in terms of the physical damage that we can inflict on him, this might make a difference, but frankly, Jake, it cuts both ways. He's dispersed his forces, he's camouflaged his forces, he's hidden his forces. That means he can't use his forces. And so he's actually suffering some military penalties because of what he's been forced to do by our threat of action.
All right. Former NSA and CIA Director Michael Hayden, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.